I'm revisiting Frightening of the Schumann Scenes from Childhood. That's number 11. So tricky is the mood switches. You know, you have that first section of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 measures, which is supposed to be the lyrical part of it. You know, it's the mother comforting the child, you know, putting the child to sleep, actually. Already I answered my first 2 measures with my next 2 measures. Now, this is even another answer to the first 4 measures, because now he throws that rhythm that you just heard. Now he's going bum dum da dee dee. So that's going to be important. It's like a counterpoint, because it's the same rhythm but different notes that you heard in the first 2 measures. Meanwhile, the right hand has little chords coming down with a melody running through it. So you have to think of both lines. So here, so there's a response there, but at the same time, I've got to listen to that left hand picking up the rhythm, the rhythmic motif of the first 2 measures. So got to think on 2 levels there. The next section is the demons of the dark that visit the child, the nightmarish part of the piece. But it's really the spooks that descend. That's the way I think of it, little ghosts, you know, so you have to get that flavor. You're being spooked out. And then it comes back again to that lyrical section. And the thing about Schumann, and because it's a romantic piece, every time you come back to the same theme again, you've got to do something a little different. You're allowed to do that with romantic music. You can do rubatos, you can play around little dips of dynamics the second time, do something different. But you can't go overboard. Now the next section, now I've heard pianists that's starting in measure 21, pianists really race this to death again. And it doesn't really say anything in the music about Schneller, which occurred when we had the spooky part. I don't think it should sound metronomic, like you've come out of the poetic section and then you just use that same beat, because it can sound like a metronome playing through it. So you have to be careful. And this next part, starting at measure 25, he has these rather big jumps. You know, he has a fundamental bass and an afterbeat jump, and it's really tricky to find those notes, I have to say. So, you know, it's good to memorize. If you're going to use music, try to memorize certain sections where you're doing the big jumps. It's hard to glue your eyes to the music and be able to find those particular jumps. That would be measure 25 and 26. So you might want to just outline first the treble. So you have 2 measures of a statement and then a response. And when he does the response, it's this little bridge that's going to bring us back to the opening theme. He says ritardando. So this will be. Fundamental bass with that would be. That would be fine if that's all it was, but you have these jumps. You have these jumps like this. 6 chords. That has to be in tempo, the first 2 measures, and then he says ritardando. Those jumps are pretty tricky. You have to kind of turn your hand a little, angle it a little this way, I noticed. Back to theme 1. This is E minor, this is a 2 chord, another 2 chord tonic. Now it goes into a different key. We think it's going to be G major, but it isn't. secondary dominant of B major chord, which is a dominant of the primary dominant of E minor. So it's E minor here, but here it goes to G major. That's another thing. He has like different keys which you don't expect. He starts like the first measure in E minor, and after he gets to the third measure, he goes to a cadence in G major with its dominant, which creates a semicadence in G major. And then he stays in G major, sticks a C sharp in for a second, but really continues and ends in a G major on the semicadence. And then from there, he goes to E minor. Now that really sounds like going to the sixth chord of G major. You think you're going to G major sixth chord, but then he bundles this into E minor, this little section. But then you think, so he keeps changing. C major now. E minor. It's another thing, different keys. And then the very end comes back again to the beginning. So there's so many statements of the first 8 measures, which makes it tricky. The other thing I find very, very challenging is when you keep coming back to the lyrical section, you can't suddenly play it super faster than you did when you started. It has to be glued together in some way that the lyrical sections kind of hold this thing together. You sort of have to have an underlying singing pulse through your lyrical sections, particularly. In terms of tempo, I sort of gauge it by how fast and clear I can do the spooky part with the very fast afterbeat chords. Easy in the schneller to pounce. It says, by the way, double P, and that's hard to do here. It's easy to pounce on the first note of the schneller instead of rolling. Be careful that you do not stomp on that first eighth. So you're going eighth, 2/16, eighth, you're rolling to that. And what makes that hard is that in and of itself it's okay, but the afterbeats can get really tight. And and you could go, oh, I got to get those afterbeats, and they can start getting so tight that they look and sound very constricted, and they aren't loose. And I'm trying to work on that because I try to put my attention on the left hand and just try to just very lightly, just like right here it is. And actually the left hand will give you a little bit more accent there because you have a tied note. It has an accent over a tied note, which makes you believe that the B in the middle is the accent. And it's also in parenthesis, which means maybe yes, maybe no. So I think that the accent in the left hand makes sense. After the final schneller, which occurred earlier in the piece but intersperses again the gorgeous lyrical theme, we have the theme coming back after the schneller, and it has a little bit different ending because it brings the piece to conclusion. It's a really very delicately beautiful ending. You'll hear what he does at the very end with the reconnection with the theme.